At freeshows.com. I'm Derek Sabato, and I'm here with the author of one of the books I've been waiting for the longest, Fight Forever, The Ballad of Kevin and Sami, author Jennifer. Jennifer, how are you today?
I'm fine. Thank you very much for having me on to talk about it. I'm always happy to talk about wrestling and Kevin and Sami.
Absolutely. For those who don't know, Jennifer's based out of Japan, so we are doing this cross-country international here on adfreeshows.com. Before we get into everything, I always ask the same question to everyone in the beginning. How did you become a fan of professional wrestling?
I came really late to professional wrestling. My family was not a wrestling family, and so I knew almost nothing about it. But then shortly after I got married, my husband and I were working on our PhD theses, and he liked to have something on in the background
Sure.
to just sort of be playing in the background, and wrestling was one of his favorites. And I never paid much attention to it. And then one night in 1997, I can tell you specifically, he suddenly dropped everything and said, "Oh my God, I have to watch this. Wait, I have to watch this." And I looked up at the TV, and there was a man in a black trench coat and white face paint coming down from the rafters. And he walked to the ring, and there was another man in a black bandana and black fringe and black sunglasses sitting on a chair. And they confronted each other. And the guy pulled out a baseball bat, and they confronted each other. And then Sting, obviously,
Yes.
turned his back on Randy Savage, handed him the bat, turned his back on him, spread his arms out, and waited. And the crowd's going crazy. And I suddenly realized what was so fascinating about wrestling, that it was this sort of morality play
Sure.
about betrayal and trust, and can we make alliances even though we're clearly really different, and this whole interactive melodrama, because the crowd was obviously a huge part of it. They were all
Absolutely.
screaming, they were losing their minds. And so that was when I really realized what was cool about professional wrestling. However, shortly after that, we moved to Japan.
Gotcha.
And it was really hard at the time to get professional wrestling, American professional wrestling at least. So for a bunch of years, we only could get it sporadically. So I didn't watch a lot. Then when the WWE Network came into place, we picked it up then so that we could watch WrestleMania with Daniel Bryan.
Mm.
And after that, because it was regularly on the network, I started to watch NXT. And that was about when Sami was starting his big Road to Redemption story that ended with him winning the NXT championship. And I got very, very hooked on Sami Zayn before I ever saw Kevin in any form. So I started
So
with
Sammy's the entrance to our story of
Sami
Fight
is the
Forever.
entrance. Yep.
So you're, God, is that 2015 or 16 when Sami?
14.
14. Okay.
Yeah.
Man, 11 years ago. Time flies.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think that Sammy's victory of the NXT title over Neville at the time. Yeah.
Neville at the time. Yeah.
I'm used to calling him Pac, so I'm trying to make
Yeah,
sure
I
I
know.
keep my references correct. Was the same night as Kevin Owens' debut in NXT.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
I grew up on the indies with Kevin and Sami, and it was El Generico, and they are a major part of the growth of one of the companies I work for, CZW. And to see them, we never thought there would be a way that two guys that came from Canada in a van every month would be able to make it into the WWE, let alone the platform they would have and now do. So Kevin's debut that night turns on his buddy, ruined Sammy's celebration. At that point, is that when you're like, what is the story and how do we go from here?
Yeah, because importantly, I had no idea who El Generico was. I had heard of him. I had probably seen him. I don't think at the time I knew that he and Sami were the same person.
Sure.
So I watched Kevin's debut. I was like, oh yeah, he seems cool. But then when he attacked Sami after they had this huge celebration, right? They hugged, they cried. There was this clear sort of We have finally made it feeling. And then he attacked Sami. And I literally stood up and pointed at the screen and said, I want to see everything these two people have done.
Yes.
I can tell that they've done a lot together. I want to know all of it. And of course, at the time, I was like, I will find every single match they were in. It has to be at least 10 or 15, but I will find them all. And it turned out to be obviously a lot more than that.
A lot more than 10 to 15, yes.
Yes.
Now, when something like that happens on WWE TV, it's always done in the WWE canon. So why do they hate each other? What's the real story? They don't really get into as much as you get into in the book, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
How fun was it to research and go back and do all this when at the time you're just doing it as a fan?
It was a blast. I mean, it was just, at the time, of course, what I did that first, right away, I went and I typed in, El Generico and Kevin Steen, and you just get so many random matches, right? Here they are as a tag team. Okay, yeah. They were a tag team. Here they are fighting each other. Obviously, okay, they're hugging here and they look different. For a long time, I couldn't figure out if there was any organization to it, or if just 1 week they hated each other and 1 week they were teaming up. And eventually because I am a researcher and I love doing research, I made like a timeline.
Sure.
And put it all in order and watched it all in order all the pieces I had at that time. And I realized that actually it all made sense. It actually all hung together as one long, coherent sort of character arc. And that was my catnip.
Yeah.
At that point, I was like, I have to figure out if you can really put it all together and make it into one story. And if so, what is that story,
Now, the funny thing is, working on the independents back when they started coming into America and the growth of how quickly they got to become one of the top acts in there, it's always been funny coincidences. It sounds like how they traveled together, they got booked together. And one of the coolest things I was ever a part of was Cage of Death, where Kevin and Sami teamed up to take on Super Dragon and Excalibur. And that's mentioned in your book. And one of my favorite parts of that is the epic hot tag that El Generico does to Super Dragon. Now, for those of you who've never seen this, please find it on YouTube. It's out there. But the story of Kevin and Sami really explodes to a bigger platform than ever before with that show. They're not in Ring of Honor as of yet, telling their arc and their story, but there's always these integral parts that another promotion would pick up on. How fun was it to dive into all that and see the varying degrees of their story before they hit WWE TV?
It was amazing. It was really fascinating to see how coherent they were as a dynamic, the two of them, from really early on. One of their first shows in America was in PWG as well.
Yes.
And I remember watching that, and I could not believe that was only like their 5th singles match, because they had this incredibly compelling, really simple story about this asshole that underestimates his friend and doesn't understand how great he is and learns his lesson. And then that they had this sort of dynamic that then translated into this incredibly fascinating tag team dynamic as well, was really amazing. And it was a lot of fun to watch them, because you can see them working on it at that time with Cage of Death. That sort of, how are we going to be a tag team? How is that going to work? Obviously, we're going to be booked as a tag team working in America. So how do we make these two really different characters click as a tag team? And you can see them building it, and it's really amazing.
One of the coolest parts of this story for me is knowing some of the players from before Ring of Honor and the transition into the growth of their visibility. And you brought up somebody in IWS in Canada that was very instrumental in not just getting them exposure, but making sure their story was told correctly. What can you tell us about La Fleur?
He was actually one of the big reasons I learned that I decided to write, because I'm sure you've read his writing. He
Yes.
wrote in this incredibly narrative style. And he actually mentions early on in one of his writings that when he first started, he would summarize matches move by move. Then he'd be like, there was moonsault, and then a senton, and then a toe drop. And he realized really quickly that that kind of sucks as a way of summarizing a wrestling match, because that's not really what the point of a wrestling match is.
Right.
And so when I read his stuff, I was blown away by it. I was like, I really want to write like that. I
Yes.
want to tell it like it was a story. So he was extremely influential. I read everything of his that I could get my hands on. So
For those of you who don't know, IWS was a company based out of Canada that was trying to fight to get exposure back in very early 2000s
yeah,
when there wasn't a lot.
yeah.
Yes. So you see the rise of Kevin, you see the rise of Sammy, and a lot of that's pushed by him. And it's one of the cooler things watching that growth. But really, their exposure explodes when PWG starts to get hot. And one of the biggest parts of that is obviously the booking of PWG and the freedom that allowed Kevin and Sammy to tell their own story. What is your favorite moment with their story in PWG?
Oh gosh. One of my favorites is in a match in a show called Steen Wolf. And it's probably like the climax of their rivalry. They're at a point when they really, it's a blood feud. They hate each other. And it's a ladder match. So they are beating the heck out of each other. They're bloody. Uh, and Generico has become completely dazed. He's been thrown off of ladders, and he's sort of staggering around, crawling around on the ring. And Kevin goes and stands in the corner and stares at him with these dead eyes and holds out his hand as though he's going to make the tag.
Yes.
And Generico lunges toward him to try to make the hot tag on instinct. And you can feel that weight of Generico's instincts are still to see this man as a friend. And it's incredibly horrific. But it's one of my favorites just because it really shows how they use the weight of the past and their history together to augment the next parts of their story.
Their ability to tell a story is really unmatched with a lot of what has gone on in professional wrestling. It's a 20-year arc at this point in time. You got a chance to sit down and talk with both of them in regards to the book. What was that experience like, and how are they to discuss their careers with?
It was fun. They when it wasn't stressful, they bickered a lot.
Not a surprise.
Not a surprise at all. But it was also really interesting to listen to them talk about how their characters came together. It was, for those of us who don't get to see Sammy talk about El Generico at all,
Yes.
that was really fascinating, because for 20 years now, when interviewers ask him, what do you think of your time as El Generico? He will smile very politely and say, I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Yes.
El Generico is an inspiration to me. And he was willing to talk to me about El Generico, and it was very amazing to me. And it was clear, and I mentioned this at the end of the book, it was clear that he still is not sure what El Generico's legacy is, and he's still working on sort of his relationship with El Generico, which is really fascinating to me, to have this person with these two incredibly different but very similar characters in this incredible disjunction that is
Yes.
El Generico existed and then ceased to exist almost entirely. And so you have this person with these two very, very different persona trying to figure out how they go together, which is really interesting because Kevin's exactly the opposite. Kevin never changes. He's always the same. You can see that he's always the same person. So it was fascinating to hear them talk about themselves that way.
When you think back and look at Kevin's career, Kevin has always been, as you said, the same character, the same guy.
Yeah.
I can sit here and tell you from personal experience that when Kevin doesn't like something, Kevin lets you know he doesn't like something. Where I think it took a little bit for Sami to get that underneath him and get that confidence to stand up for himself. And one of the coolest things for me is that I personally, deep down, think that Sami's the reason WWE got hot with his portrayal of himself in the bloodline. When you look at 20 years later, from a small Canadian building to on the biggest stage at Elimination Chamber in Montreal, where it's this big baby face and you still have Kevin involved, there's no better, in my mind, character arc in professional wrestling in the last 25 years than these two. Would you agree with that?
Obviously, yes. And I think they've done such a great job of creating something that's, I want to say, totally unprecedented. I know if I do, somebody will come up with something that's similar, but I really want to say that there's nothing like it in professional wrestling. So many things have to fall into place.
Yes.
Right? For starters, you both have to be equally talented. You have to not have too many injuries that disrupt everything. You have to get hired by the same promotions.
Sure.
So much has to happen for it to be possible for something like that to come true, that I'm not positive anybody else could do it as well as they have. I was actually there at Elimination Chamber. I was in the front row, actually. It was amazing. Although the night before that SmackDown, when Sami came to the ring full babyface again and everybody sang to him, was probably my favorite wrestling experience ever. It was
interesting.
It was a real pinnacle for me. Because of course, if you know what Sami Zayn was like in 2014 and that he was like my first real favorite wrestler.
Sure.
That real babyface Sami Zayn was one of my favorites. And so to see him return, not going back to exactly the same thing, right? He'd become a different person.
Right.
But a much more full-bodied sort of person who'd done really bad things and become a better person through it. You know?
The evolution of these characters is unparalleled in the last 20 years. And I agree with that. When you sat down with Kevin and Sami and did your interview for the book, was there one thing that they told, either one of them told you that you had no idea about, that you were blown away by?
What? You probably know this. Kevin, whenever you ask him about El Generico, he will usually in the past say that El Generico is dead.
Yes.
And sometimes make up gruesome ways that El Generico has died. And so I had always assumed that Kevin was pleased that El Generico was in the past and didn't want him to come back. And when I was talking to them, Sami said that some people have pushed for El Generico to come back. And Kevin said, I will keep trying until I get El Generico back. And that was such a shock to me.
Yeah.
It had not crossed my mind that Kevin might miss El Generico and might actually want him to come back. And that was the only time they really disagreed about anything in my conversation with them. They actually went back and forth for a fair amount of time about whether or not El Generico should be seen again. I had not expected that at all.
That's not a surprise to me that they disagree, but it's fascinating. Yeah, it's fascinating to know that Kevin still holds a spot for Generico. And I think Kevin is, both of them are masterful storytellers. So I'm not surprised that Kevin still has an element of wanting to do more with him and other aspects of it. When you talk about the evolution of them and also some of the wars they've been in, what are some of the most gruesome moments in the research of this book that you found in professional wrestling with them?
Final Battle 2010 is a real bloodbath.
Yes.
And I came across it quite early. And if you know that I mostly was watching NXT at that time,
sure.
I wasn't quite ready for it. It was incredibly intense. And part of what is most striking about Final Battle for me is that El Generico never bled.
Yes.
Because he had a mask, and it's really hard to bleed with a mask on. And at one of the climactic points in Final Battle, they managed to rip his mask to the point where he can get bloodied, and it's a mess.
Yeah.
But I think in retrospect, for me, watching it as somebody who knew Sami, it was incredibly shocking because you can see Sami's face.
Yes.
Just enough through the blood that it was really strange, because it was kind of as if Generico's face was getting peeled off at that point. So it's more shocking for somebody who knows Sami well. I'm sure it was quite bloody and shocking at the time, of course, but now coming from the present and looking back and saying, oh, I know that guy. That's this sort of collision of the persona was kind of weirdly unnerving.
Yeah.
In a way that they couldn't have meant at the time. And I think they mentioned in the interview with me, actually, that they were really worried that his face would show too much.
Yeah.
So they were really careful to make sure that he had a lot of blood. And yes, they achieved that.
They took care of that one. They didn't.
Yeah.
They didn't have to worry about that one. Is there a favorite match of theirs, singles, tag, something that they were involved in of yours, that sticks out in your mind in the memory of them?
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Is there a favorite match with the two of them involved in, either singles or a tag match, that stands out above the rest?
There's a lot. Obviously Battleground, right? Because that seemed like the moment that they seemed to really realize that we can create something really resonant that will continue to go forward. There's a lot of closure. That's the end of their first major feud in WWE. But you can tell that they've realized that they're going to be able to build on this in the future. That this is going to be something going forward, that they're finally meshed, they're finally synced up.
Yeah.
Because for a while there, because they were out of sync for a while, basically, with Kevin at the top of Ring of Honor and Sami at the bottom of WWE. And so for a while, it felt kind of like they were never going to be able to get quite at the same point. And part of the reason Battleground is so strong is that feeling of, okay, yeah, this is going forward. We have this as our base. So that works for us.
Is it weird to look back at the evolution of them and see the different dynamics and then still being able to work as well together now as they did back then, when they had, less injuries, less inhibitions, will throw each other off ladders, things like that, to where they're working at TV style and still going out there and performing at the highest level?
It's interesting because there was an episode of Table for Three a while ago with Matt Hardy on it.
Mm-hmm.
And Matt Hardy, they were talking about how do you keep wrestling when your body is not going to be able to do the daredevil stuff. And Matt Hardy said something like, as you get older, you have to start taking more emotional risks than physical risks. You have to push the envelope emotionally rather than physically. And I think you can see that with Kevin and Sami, that as they've been less and less able to do, crazy physical stuff, they've been able to adapt by doing more and more resonant emotional work. Their matches tend to have, in WWE, they tend to have obviously a lot less physical drama, but a lot more sort of unusual emotional overtones. They make sure to work in sort of vulnerable moments, things that are, I think, harder to do emotionally for people. I think they've gotten really good at being willing to lay that kind of vulnerability out there, which is a different kind of risk that actually I think a lot of people are less willing to take than falling off a ladder sometimes. So yeah, I think they've really deepened their storytelling by adding that kind of emotional resonance.
We are at WrestleMania season. We are recording this on April 4th. We're 2 weeks away from WrestleMania in Las Vegas. They've had a lot of WrestleMania moments together, which looking back seems crazy to me because two kids starting in Canada, and now I think they've been involved 3 or 4 different WrestleManias with each other. Their first WrestleMania together was the ladder match,
Mhm.
fortunately with a ton of other people involved, but they've had big tag team matches. Bryan Danielson and Shane McMahon being involved, and also with the Usos main event. When you look back at that, what do you think is their WrestleMania moment? And what's your WrestleMania moment as well?
I think theirs probably is winning the tag titles because it is this sort of culmination,
Yeah,
this sort of feeling of we made it, we're we're a tag team together. It's the idea that they main evented WrestleMania to win the tag teams, win the tag titles when that's never happened before.
correct.
It's only the second time a tag team is main evented. It's the only time that the titles have been defended in the main event of WrestleMania. So that seemed like it seemed fitting
Yeah,
that they and the Usos, for that matter, were in that match. They deserved that sort of that focus, I think. I think if you were to ask Kevin and Sammy, they would say that their real WrestleMania moment has not happened yet.
I believe that.
I believe with all my heart that they are lobbying constantly for a main event title match between the two of them at
Yeah,
WrestleMania. Who knows? I mean, obviously there is a lot of competition for those slots, but I don't think they're going to give up on the idea.
no,
I'm sure that's for me personally, because of my focus being on this sort of push and pull of getting along and not getting along, winning the tags together will
yeah,
probably always be the ultimate for me because it's the only way to do something as equals. Uh, but but if they can get that title match at WrestleMania, that will be pretty amazing.
yeah.
I'll be pushing for it.
How did you get involved in writing about this and the production of the book with Hybrid Shoot?
Yeah, Jonathan Snowden got in touch with me. I had written most of their history down and posted it on a blog, The
Hmm.
Spectacle of Excess, but with a lot more sort of focus on my own journey as a wrestling fan, my own feelings about wrestling. And so when Jonathan Snowden got in touch with me, he said, "I'd like you to write it up as more of a history,
Sure.
as a one full narrative." And I realized that that really kind of was the next step. It had to all get put down, and I hadn't touched the WWE stuff. I'd only
Gotcha.
gotten up to the end of Generico and Kevin Steen's relationship, and I'd written about the WWE stuff as it happened, but I'd never put it together as a history. I kind of, because I had lived through it, I kind of assumed everybody knew it.
Sure.
But of course not. And now it's been 11 years,
Yeah.
and there are people who don't remember what was going on in 2015 between two people. So I really wanted to have a chance to put it all together and talk about how their WWE career still does hang together. It's got a lot bigger gaps in it
Yeah.
because of all sorts of different things, injuries and COVID and being split up on different brands. But I really feel like even when they were split up or injured or not interacting, they were still sort of calibrating their character by the other person's character.
Yes.
That, for example, when Sammy was heel and Kevin was face, even though they didn't interact for about 2 years, most of Kevin's actions were kind of defined by his regrets and his worries about Sammy as a heel. So I wanted to put that together in one place and make those connections that were hard for WWE to make because nobody's going to say, well, Kevin Owens seems to still be having regrets about this character that's on a totally different brand now.
Right.
No, nobody's going to say that.
Right.
So I wanted to try to put it all in one place.
What was their reaction when you sat down with them to discuss you were writing a book about their journey together and their thought process behind someone going into such detail as you did?
We had communicated a little bit about it through messages
Mhm.
beforehand. Um, they were surprised I hadn't tried to get in touch with them before.
Interesting.
Which was interesting to me because we talked about this a little bit. I really approached the project as I often describe it as basically like a movie novelization, wanting to put together what anybody could see, but would be almost impossible for anybody to see because it took place in like 7 different promotions across 20 years. And I wanted to put that all in one place, but I wanted it to be the public story and not necessarily the sort of private backstage thoughts of the people who played the characters.
Yeah.
Even though there's a lot of bleed through, there's a lot of times when the backstage stuff becomes part of the story. But on the whole, I tried to make it so that I didn't need to interview them, which of course turned out to be very convenient because they're very hard to interview for, they're really busy. They work with WWE. So it worked out well, but they were a little surprised I hadn't tried harder.
Interesting.
I kind of wish I had now, of course.
Yeah.
But
do you think at the end of the day, the story of Kevin and Sami being put into ebook and written down is something they're going to look back upon and go, yeah, we did that. And it's one of the better ways to document our career?
I really hope so, obviously. When I occasionally had problems writing, when I was like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
I'm never going to finish this. What's even the point of it? There was a time my husband stopped and said, what you need to think of this as is that when Kevin or Sami's children say to them, why did you miss so many of my birthdays?
Yeah.
What were you doing for most of my life? They can pull this book out and say, here's what we were doing. We were making this story. And then of course I was like, oh, well, obviously I have to write this now.
Got to finish it now.
Yeah, I've got to finish it. So obviously that's my greatest hope, is that being able to see it all in one place, from a step back, because of course they're so close to it all the time that it might be hard for them to see the connections at that sort of macro level. That would be great. I would love that. That's my hope.
Is this going to be the last book from?
Oh, it's a good question. I'll have to see.
Okay.
Obviously they're going to keep making more content. So we'll see. I don't think we might not get another 20 years.
I hope for their sake. I hope they're.
Wouldn't it be great? Well, okay, if they could find a way to do it without actually damaging their bodies anymore.
I was going to say, I know them relatively well, and I wouldn't be surprised if Kevin wants to jump off a ladder in 20 years and Sami. So that would not surprise me.
That's my favorite footnote in the book. One of them is the backstage documentary about the COVID WrestleMania that shows Kevin looking up at the sign, the WrestleMania sign, and saying, I'm going to jump off that bitch. And I was like, yep, that's Kevin.
The story of Kevin wanting to jump off the screen in Tampa and the pirate ship.
I was rooting for him to get off that pirate ship.
I remember hearing that story and someone was like, that's nuts. And I'm like, that's Kevin. That's none of that is a surprise to me. And to see he then are now pushing and influencing another level of talent coming through, it's got to be full circle for them. What's your next love story with the business, do you think?
It's a good question. Nobody's written a full-on book about Kenny Omega and Kota Ibushi yet. There are a bunch of there are people who are clearly, Kenny and Kota obviously not exactly inspired by Kevin and Sami. They clearly inspired each other.
Yes.
It's a fascinating, both Kenny and Kota are very close with Sami. So clearly they felt this real connection.
Sure.
Ciampa and Gargano clearly are inspired by Kevin and Sami. It would be interesting to see what we can do with that. I'm hoping to see female wrestlers get more chances to make long-term stories like that.
Yes.
There are some extra challenges, and they need more screen time.
Yes.
But I'm hoping that there's going to be more sort of long-term, intense rivalries. I'm sure someone could write a great book about Tony Storm and Mariah May at some point. They're working on that sort of emotional resonance connection. Maybe there'll be a tag team someday.
It's funny you say that. I brought that up to somebody not much long ago and said they could be the next 20-year distance story if it's done correctly. But
I'd love to see it.
the dynamic of the business has changed dramatically from that time when Kevin and Sami were coming up. There was not competition for WWE like there is nowadays with AEW. So, that aspect of it, again, I was talking to Lex Luger earlier today. The Lex Luger Sting story was a very long one that ran, 10 years, but at the same time, Lex left at some point. So there's all these different dynamics, them coming up together at the time of the shrinkage and the expansion of the business helped dramatically with their story, I think. And I got to be a part of it. You wrote an amazing story on it. Is this something you're going to look back on and go, this was all worth the time and effort?
I actually already feel that way. Simply having it done made me feel that way. So that was just knowing that I got it all finished, that it's all in one place, that it's something they can build on because they're clearly going to keep building on it. There's going to be more. Just really was thrilling to me. So I'm already really content with it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And for those of you who have yet to check it out, it's mithgifs.substack.com. Head over there. You will be able to subscribe. You will be able to get into Jennifer's Substack. If you follow her on Twitter, it is at mithgifs. It is one of the best Twitter accounts to follow. And right now it is available on ebook. The physical copy should be available soon at Hybrid Shoot, HYBRIDSHOOT on X. I don't know that there's an actual physical link yet out there to get it on the Amazons, but please make sure you follow those Twitter accounts and you can find it available. And it is a great read. It is I'm a special reader, so I read it in 3 days. So I'm a big fan of getting through as much as I can as quickly as possible. It is worth it. The story is amazing. Jennifer, anything else we need to add today?
Just wanted to say thank you very much for having me on. Thank you to you. It's great to talk to somebody that was part of Kevin and Sami's story. And obviously, as always, thank you to Kevin and Sami themselves. And thank you to my publisher.
Yes. At Hybrid Shoot, at MITHGIFS. Make sure you check it out. Fight Forever, The Ballad of Kevin and Sami, available now. Download it, buy it, purchase it, spend the money on it. And we'll see you next time here on adfreeshows.com.